Please subscribe and hit the like button.
Good evening from Paradise. This is Yada Yahweh Radio. I know we have two people, one from the land where there is no electricity and the other where the land where there is no freedom.
Or very expensive electricity.
Yeah, very expensive electricity and no freedom. And the other one where the electrical company went bankrupt after shutting down on the population. How are you, fellas?
Can't complain.
Okay, well, good.
Oh, I can.
Well, yeah, well, I actually can. Somebody asked me, so how are you doing? You know, they're kind of looking for, what do you need? I don't need anything. I'm doing great. I don't need anything. It's kind of a weird spot to be in. And then one of the things she asked me, my wife and I, usually on Thursday nights, but we actually had our gas turned off on, it's not like we have civil gas, but I had a gas repair guy replumbing my gas supply. And so we postponed our Thursday night dinner to tonight. And this is so obviously with us destroying the value of our fiat currency with all of these enormous debt programs, COVID relief programs, shutting down the economy, it's going to collapse. Is it going to, the market keeps on going up, but it's valued with this funny money currency. And a lot of times there's always a run-up prior to the crash. What's the best way to prepare for it? And well, I've given it some fleeting thought. Of course, when you're in the covenant, you don't preoccupy yourself with those kind of thoughts because Yahweh is our caretaker. He's responsible for us. Now, that doesn't mean we relinquish our normal responsibilities as head of household and of someone that works for a living to feed and care for and support our families. We do these things, but we don't fret over them much. But I said, okay, well, if you're asking me, what are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about? Because while I cannot tell you if our currency and economy is going to collapse in 1 year, which I think that's a little too soon, 3 years, which still may be on the edge of too soon, but possible, 5 years, certainly, highly possible. 7 years, we're getting into exceedingly likely, within 9 years, almost certain. What are the kinds of things that we should have that would help us survive? And obviously, the things that I talked about 20 years ago, with there being an economic reset and the economic reset being sold by the forgiveness of all debt, getting people to buy into it and replacing on some measure old currency with new currency. I began talking about that 20 years ago. And now you can actually read the international programs where this is openly being discussed between governments. So that prediction is borne fruit. Then that means that the likelihood of owning things like gold is going to be of marginal utility because governments confiscate hard assets like that to be able to effectively control people, because the new currency will be a very controlling mechanism. So money is not going to be the tool. Your credit cards are not going to work. Your bank accounts are not going to have the kind of wherewithal that's necessary. So I just began to think out loud, what kind of things are going to be important? Well, the single most important thing is going to be food. And there's lots of things you can do as you begin to notice that there's a downturn. You can buy lots of frozen foods. I happen to like salmon. You can buy lots of canned food. I happen to like tuna. And there's a zillion disaster supply food kinds of things, and you can buy those kinds of meals. You'll be able to trade those meals for most anything. Gasoline in containers of gasoline. Containers of diesel will be exceedingly valuable. Being independent off the grid with solar energy would be something very valuable. And then you can think of things that you can trade in a barter system. Tools, shovels, for example. That kind of tools will be exceedingly valuable. If you have a number of those, you'll be able to survive. And then somebody says, well, wouldn't land where you can grow food and raise sheep? And I said, not necessarily. Because if people are hungry, they're going to steal from it.
Steal it, yeah.
Yeah, and so they're going to kill your animals and steal them, and they'll take your whatever food that you're raising, and you're not going to sit there with a gun all day. So no, I'm not sure that's particularly helpful. And you can't be ostentatious with anything you have, otherwise you will be robbed. But
cigarettes, cigarettes and whiskey.
Cigarettes and whiskey. Well, I'm sure
I don't smoke and I rarely ever drink, but that's people want it.
Yeah, but again, you have to think of who we are and who we represent.
Okay.
And therefore, well, listen. I realize that beer and wine is the essence of civilization, and that Yahowah is a connoisseur of wine. So I can tell you that there is no issue at all with wine. Whiskey, I'm not so sure, and cigarettes, I am. So I might modify that.
Well, just to barter with. You don't have to open them and smoke them.
Yeah,
you don't want to smoke them.
Yeah,
I know how to brew and I know how to make wine.
There you go. Yeah, being a home brewer.
I'm coming to your house.
Yeah, there's a good thing. So having ample refrigerator, good generation of power, solar capability, all those kinds of things would be a value in this.
Can you be on solar down there completely? And
yes.
Have enough energy to survive?
Yes. Yeah, they call it off the grid, and there's a net metering capability here where you can take any percentage of your power up to 100% and be on net metering so that you can choose any one of three sources of power: generator, solar, or utility, municipal utility. And my goal is to be net metering with 100% capacity, where I still allow myself to use the utility if I need it as a backup. But my primary will be solar, my secondary will be generator, my third will be what they call WAPA here, Water and Power Authority. Yeah, water, WAPA. So yes, we can be, and I think being independent is a prudent thing. But as I say, I don't fret much over it. I fret more about trying to complete these books. Speaking of the books, we did finish volume 3. I think now there's 13 new volumes that are in the new format, new fonts, new look. The edit team has been working overtime, and Jackie has been doing a spectacular job. Volume 3 of Questioning Paul, Devil's Advocate, has now been published at Amazon. Jackie specifically asked me to encourage people to wait until Sunday before they buy it. I think we made a couple of changes to a chapter based upon some translations that I had updated. And so she wants everybody to wait until Sunday before anyone buys it. But we do now have 3 volumes of Yada Yahweh, 5 of observations, 1 of an introduction to God, 2 of coming home, and 3 of questioning Paul. 13 in total, and I'm about 175 pages into volume 4 of questioning Paul. We talked about it, Kirk, briefly before the show began. There are a couple of things that have worked their way into a series that we actually did on this program some time ago when I had the reason to translate Paul's first public sermon. Well, I've gone back through that, and I've added a lot to it. But the principal things that I've added to Paul's first sermon are something I promised on this show some time ago, the sibling oracles. And so I've read through the sibling oracles, and I have shown that they are the mythos that created John the Baptist. John the Baptist is a fictitious character. But he was needed for Paul's theology because somebody had to anoint his Iusu Christou. Otherwise, you can't call him the Messiah. So he was unofficially anointed in the Jordan River, and the dove coming down on him is the excuse that Paul came up with for anointing. And then he never claimed to be the Son of God, so he had to be called the Son. Well, of course, there's the voice like Paul loved chatty gods that would call out in a voice from the heavens, which, by the way, Yahweh said he would not do anymore. But the Pauline God does, and it's the John the Baptist scene where he says, "This is my son, whom I'm proud." And then, of course, you have to have the act of baptism replace circumcision, and he is John the Baptist, and whereas he baptizes Jesus. The whole story is not true, but then Paul gets his pal Luke to do the story. So proud that a Greek god would be happy to have the story. If you read the opening of Luke, I mean, you have babies seen through their mommy's wombs and doing dances. You have God enabling John the Baptist to be conceived. You have angelic announcements. I mean, you've got all the stuff of Greek fairy tales woven into the plot. And so I found that there's a lot more to the sibling oracles. As a matter of fact, the principal fathers of the Christian religion, all the way up to St. Augustine and the City of God, actually presented the Sibyls, these female prophets, as equivalent to Yahweh's Hebrew prophets of what they would call the Old Testament. They're in the Sistine Chapel, for example. They are in all of the early Christian writings. They're cited as if they were an inspired prophet of God. And much of what they said was incorporated into the Christian New Testament to shape it. And so I incorporated a lot of that into this chapter, and I want to share it. I mean, we will share it sooner rather than later. But the other thing that I was not as aware of is I was trying to figure out why there's so many heroic aspects to Iesu Christus' life. And, why also is Paul presented as this heroic character that battles the forces of evil and talks with the gods and performs these signs and wonders and travels by ship around the world. And I was pondering, why are these characters presented the way they are? And it dawned on me that this is the story of Odysseus. What we're reading here is Homer's Odyssey.
Yeah.
And so I began to think of the correlations between the Odyssey and the Christian New Testament. And then I said, I can't be the first one that has come up with this. So I Googled it. And a fellow wrote a book in 2000, published by Yale University. Last name is McDonald. And he wrote this book on the parallels between the Iliad and Odyssey and the Christian New Testament. Oh my God, it is overwhelming, and I'll be sharing just some of that with everybody as we move forward. Listen, I've always known that there is and we've talked about this for some time. There is a reason why with Dowd we have nearly 100 Psalms and 25 Proverbs that he wrote with his own hand, memorialized even in the Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, the Psalms are the largest collection of scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't know if you know that. Psalms are number one. Isaiah, who speaks prophetically of Dowd, is number two. And the Torah scrolls are number three. And so we have, I don't know, but let's say 250,000 words written by Dowd, maybe more. And then Dowd's life is chronicled by one of the most interesting and involved of all of the prophets, a man that was both judge and prophet, Samuel. So Yahweh assigned a spectacular, the judge that transitioned into a prophet at the time that he was born and through his life and chronicling the whole thing was Samuel. And so we know just so much about this man's life. in the language that he spoke, retained in the language he spoke, and retained in time through the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we'd like to compare that to what we have that Yosha wrote with his own hand. You know, if Yosha was so important, wouldn't we have more from Yosha written with his own hand?
Or anything?
We don't have a single word, not any. Can you name a prophet in the of any consequence and that is among the 40 chosen by Yahweh who didn't write something down, who Yahweh specifically didn't ask to write something down? That list would be really short.
Yeah.
And if Yosha is supposed to be the one that's communicating the new plan of salvation to us, we not only don't have a single word that he wrote, we don't have a single word that he spoke in the language he spoke it. Not one. And so you really pretty quickly come to say, wait a minute, he's not the big deal. He's the Passover lamb. And by the way, in this play, Passover lamb is not a speaking role. That is not a speaking part. And so there's a reason that all we have conveying what he said concurrent with his life are a bunch of womp rats and nitwits. Mark was a tool of Paul. Luke was a tool of Paul. Matthew was a tool of Paul. And Yahowah is so badly maintained, so poorly maintained, that there's a reason that we don't have anything that you can rely on. And so it does drive to the heart of the matter of, okay, so these nitwits, and creating gospels, what I determined here in this last week is that, well, what came first? We are convinced as we read the Christian New Testament that the book of Matthew is first, and then Mark, and then Luke, and then John, and then the book of Acts. Well, that's not the way it was written at all. What came first is Paul's first speech, which is coterminous with his first letter. And his first speech and his first letter are identical. And they were both presented in 52 CE. And one's memorialized by Luke, and the other in Paul's own hand. And they both precede the first gospel by 10 to 15 years. At the time of the speech, Mark knew Paul, but with Barnabas, he rejected Paul. And you read later that Paul had Timothy and others that were part of his posse specifically manipulate Mark so that Mark would be drawn back to Paul and sent to him because Paul wanted to use him. And what he used him for was creating the gospel according to Paul. That's the book of Mark. And while there are aspects of Luke that go into greater detail, like the whole mythology of John the Baptist, since John the Baptist is essential to Pauline Christianity. Without John the Baptist, the whole thing falls apart. So, but Mark is wholly incorporated into Luke, and then Luke ad-libs according to Paul. And of course, Matthew was a Pauline-inspired pseudonym for somebody that wrote around 100 CE. And so when you actually put it in the order that it was written and spoken, the whole Christian idea of man killing God and God getting pissed off at Jews for killing him, and for him saying, well, then Jews don't deserve salvation. I'm going to give all of my promises to the Goyim, who are the ones, by the way, that actually killed him. It's all of that and this transition from knowledge and actions based upon the Torah to blind faith in a God that was modeled after Odysseus. All of that was conceived by Paul, and Paul's speeches in early speeches in Acts and his letters to the Galatians, is the first thing, and all the rest of it was shaped around it to accommodate it.
Wow.
And then when you can see, how did Luke and Paul, they are not creative individuals, so how did they come up with this epic tale? How did they get people to buy into this epic tale? And so what they did is they presented their Iousu Christou as a more compelling individual than Odysseus, based on the Homeristic style.
So, which they always does. They counterfeit.
It's a marvelous counterfeit. Well, it's not also
plagiarism.
It's almost too thin, because what we're going to find out is the odd details, which make no sense when you're just reading the story, all have a counterpart in either the Odyssey or the Iliad. And we'll go into things like, there is not one chance in a billion that Herod had a policy, or that Rome had a policy on Jewish holidays of accommodating the Jews by allowing them to pick a prisoner to release. That whole thing, it makes no sense. There's no history of it. There's no basis for it, and it flies in the face of credulity. It's just completely made up. So how do they come up with it? It's exactly what it's part of a story that is told in the Odyssey. And what we'll find is the oddest stories, that there may be like 11 points in a certain order that are told in the Odyssey about these odd things. They're presented in exactly the same order, with all points being replicated in the Christian gospel.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it's really bad. I'm so glad that we've come to know and love the Torah and prophets, and come to know and love Dode and his Mizmor prior to learning this, because it would be devastating if you came upon this and you didn't know Yahowah and know his hatred of the Christian New Testament. It would be devastating, because it is devastated when you study Homer and the Sibylline oracles. And what I was telling you, because Kirk, you asked me a question, and we'll get back to our subject here for tonight, but you asked me the question, how is it possible that in all of this time, with all of these Christian scholars and all of the great thinkers and all the great writers and all the great universities and all the books and all the sermons, that not a single Christian has held Paul accountable for any one of his lies? And I'm as I said, I just completed volume 3 of Questioning Paul, and now I'm writing a completely new volume on volume 4. And in writing it, I'm going back to Paul's original speech. And in it, Paul is constantly citing the Torah of prophets to prove his point. And each time he takes something out of context that he misapplies and misquotes to infer the exact opposite of what God said. But it's actually worse than that, because in every time that he does it, either 1 or 2 verses prior to the thing that he took out of context, or 1 or 2 verses afterwards, God reveals something that completely exposes and condemns Paul. And so all anybody had to do is to look up one of these and say, wait a minute, he misquoted that. And then to read it in context and say, he didn't just misquote it. His conclusion is the opposite of what God said. And, oh, by the way, if I read just the 2 or 3 verses before and 2 or 3 verses after, it's actually condemning exactly what Paul is doing. This man can't be telling the truth. He can't be rational. He can't be speaking for God. This cannot be an inerrant book, therefore it can't be God-inspired scripture. And if he did it once, did he do it any more times? And then to check, and every single time he cites something, the exact same pattern. Misappropriated, applied, taken out of context, to convey the opposite of the point that's actually being made. And so you'd say, wait a minute, it's been 1,950 years. Couldn't somebody figure it out? And then I keep on going back because I literally am the moth that flame to this. But Shabbat 1 and 2. Where God just says everything he could possibly say about this guy is coming, this is the lie he's going to perpetrate, this is how he's going to perpetrate it, this is his character, this is his target audience, this is the consequence, these are all the details. This, by the way, is when he's going to arrive, and this is his name.
Throw me a map.
Even if it, it's an odd, it's Shabbat Oak. Whoever heard of Shabbat Oak? And so let's say that, you're just not that into the prophets and you've never read Shabbat Oak. Okay, I get it. Paul quoted from Shabbat Oak 3 times. 3 times.
Wow.
And so all you had to do was look up his citation where he is stating the opposite of what God states that takes you to the Shabbat prophecy that specifically calls out and condemns Shaul by name. You know why Paul changed his name from Shaul to Paul? Because he is called out by name throughout the prophets as Shaul.
Yeah.
That's why he changed his name. But he took us right to it, and yet there's not a single theologian. And if you were to study the book of Habakkuk, and they would say, well, that it's not Shaul, he's speaking of Sheol, the pit. Well, then why does God in the same sentence say a mortal man with a soul is named Shaul? Oh, come on. Folks, he couldn't have made it any clearer for you. And through the entire prophecy, it's third person masculine singular. Well, he's talking about Babylon. Yeah, Chaldean is mentioned one time in the text because it was a Babylonian religion. But Babylon isn't third person masculine singular, and Babylon is not a mortal man and does not have a soul. And there was no one named Shaul that ruled over Babylon. And by the way, Babylon did not attack, criticize, and seek to annul the Torah, and we're told that is this man's greatest crime. Babylon did not seek to annul circumcision, and yet that was this man's crime. Babylon did not mock the idea of man killing God, because their gods were killed in battles with men all the time. This man did. It's so blatantly obvious that he was a fraud. And yet when you point it out to Christians, they can't even process it. That's the one thing I kept on asking myself. Yeah. So what's the question?
Why can't they process that?
Why can't they process it? Why is it, Kirk, that's the thing that I kept on asking myself all the way through this new translation, which is that it's so obvious that he's lying. Then why is it after 1950 years, this is the first book to expose and condemn Paul by comparing what Paul said to what God said? Why is that? I understand that there is something called Jesus Words Only that tries to compare Paul to Jesus, but that's a fool's folly.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, there was no Jesus. So you're strike one. Strike two is we don't know diddly squat about what Yosha actually said. Yeah, I mean, Yosha's life was brought to us by nincompoops and lump rats. So we don't know what he said. So you can't make that comparison. I mean, you can say, but they don't, in Jesus' words only, that Yahshua was the Passover lamb. The one thing that it's one thing that Paul never says of him. He was the Passover lamb. That's a big job. I'm delighted he did it. Yes. If he didn't do it, none of us would have the opportunity to enter heaven or to have life after death. It's a wonderful job, but it's not a speaking part. But why is it? Because questioning Paul. Now, this is the third rewrite of it, and this rewrite will be, 2,500 pages when it's done. And by the way, it is really, really powerful. And there's some places it takes on a prophet of doom tone. It gets really snarky. And I've had a number of people now have read the snarky part, and they said, okay, you get by with it. I'm buying into the snarky. I'm also told a lot of people don't understand sarcasm, and there's a couple of chapters where I'm really sarcastic.
But it's a chance to learn.
It is pejorative. It is judgmental. It is condemning. I mean, I'm now calling Paul a schizophrenic, a psychotic, a psychopath, a narcissist. He was. But anyway, it should not be. I was telling Kirk, JB, I'm sitting here finishing this last chapter of things that Paul quoted, and Paul quoted from a passage in Yahowah, and I'm there translating the passage of Yahowah, and I always like to see what comes before and what comes after. And what comes after this one, the next two lines, say that a fella named Yada is going to be a goy, not of Israel, and he's going to come along, and he's going to explain this to you in no uncertain terms, and he's going to do so on behalf of Yahweh, and for the purpose of calling Israel home. There you go. Okay. Well.
Okay, let's take odds on who this is.
All right. So we're boy, it must have been desperate to find somebody willing to do this. But
that's what you have for job security. I think I was.
Yeah, as you said, I've got job security, but for no reason other than no one else wants the job. Can you imagine? One of these passages I'm reading, Yahweh says, Abraham is my friend. I mean, this guy, I guess God only sees the end result, so maybe God doesn't even see how horrible he was. But he was horrible. I mean, we talk about the Abrahamic religions. That's the last guy you'd want to be associated with. I mean, this guy sold his own wife into prostitution twice, and the last time he did it, she was 90 years old. I mean, come on. So, did Abraham get this role because he was a good guy? Hell no. It's just that there weren't any other candidates. I mean, did Moshe get the job of leading the people out of Egypt and of scribing the Torah because he was Dodian? Yeah, that he was Dodian, that he had courage and compassion and leadership skills and raring to go and eager to serve Yahweh? Hell no. It was none of those.
I won't go.
No, I'm not. Now, I will tell you, Moshe is a guy I'd like to meet because herding these cats through the desert for 40 years and surviving that. Oh, that's a rare dude. And I'm always impressed with the Devarim Deuteronomy, where it's Moshe. For example, the two tests of how do we know if God's saying this? Moshe is providing them for us.
Yes.
Yahweh delineates the 10 statements on stone, but it's in Devarim that they're explained. Moshe, bright dude, God chose well in this case. It's obviously why he put up with a lot. But most of these characters are not are flawed individuals, and
exemplary, not exemplary.
And in one of the prophecies, epitome as Paul is trying to do the 1-2 punch of replacement theology, and both the 1 and the 2 punch of replacement theology appear in Paul's first speech. The first is you have to transfer every promise that Yahweh made to Dode to Iesu Christou. Otherwise, Iesu Christou has no credibility. Because you know how many prophecies there are in the Torah prophets and Psalms regarding a fellow named Yosha? Guys, would you like to tell me? How many prophecies say Yosha is going to do this, that, or the other thing?
None.
None. Not one. And so,
I'm going through my list here.
If your Iesu Christou is going to be the Son of God, and he's going to be the Messiah, and he's going to be the Savior, and he's going to be the one that's predicted, well, you got a real problem because there are no prophecies that say that Yosha is going to come on the scene and do anything. And about 90% of the prophecies that are attributed to him are attributed to Dode and actually name him. And so Christians had to say, well, God's dumb as a stone. He doesn't know his Dode from his Iesu Christou. And so he really meant to say Iesu Christou. We don't know why he said Dode. But nonetheless, all those prophecies apply to him. So the first thing he has to do is to say, Dode was nothing but a sperm donor. He died a long time ago. His body is rotten. And so all the prophecies about Dode coming back to life, being revived, not decaying, being the subject of the second coming, being the Son of God, being the Messiah, being the Shepherd, being the King, all of that stuff has to apply to Iesu Christou because Dode's dead and buried. That's the first plank of replacement theology. Without replacement theology, there's no Christianity. The second plank is all those promises that God made to Israel have to be transferred to the church. Now, of course, the biggest problem with that is that the most of the promises that God made to Israel are fulfilled according to God upon his return. So if he's doing that, it's pretty hard for him to have transferred them to somebody else if he's called those somebody else beasts. But nonetheless, you have to be able to make the transfer, and so there has to be an explanation or motivation for the transfer. And so the motivation for the transfer is that dastardly Jews, they went off and killed God. And that pissed God off. And so by pissing God off, by not making by killing him, he is, of course, going to transfer all the promises he made to those people who no longer deserve salvation to the people who actually killed him. Oh, excuse me. We can't talk about the Romans that way, but yeah, that's what they did. Now, a couple of problems with that whole scenario is one is that you don't have much of a God, right? Not much of a God.
Yeah.
Second of all, killing God, if you could do that, would prove that God is inept, not that God can save you. Bodily resurrection is the dumbest idea in the world because it's counterproductive. The whole idea is if you want to have eternal life, you've got to be transformed from physical to spiritual. To go from flesh to flesh is counterproductive. You've accomplished nothing. And oh, by the way, it wasn't the Jews that killed him. If the Jews wanted to kill him, if they had the power to kill him in a Roman province, which they didn't, they would have stoned him. Last time I checked, he was crucified. Crucifixion was the most formidable public form of Roman execution. And then, of course, Paul has to transfer all the power of that to this graven image called the cross. And so the cross is imbued with the ability to save because you've got to come up with somehow, how does the death of God and faith in that produce salvation? Well, because the cross becomes this magical icon. Well, that's the second leg of replacement theology, is we replace the Jews with the Gentiles because God got pissed off that the Gentiles were killed. So it is quite the story, and every aspect of what you read now in the Gospels of any consequence is woven into false first speech, where everything he said was a lie. So there's little wonder that God said, and he says it in the Shabbat prophecy, and he says it again in Isaiah. He says, other than coming up with this written and systematic renunciation of Shaul, then I'm going to stand by and do nothing, because there's nothing I can do. But ultimately, I will have it exposed and renounced systematically, diligently, in writing, for the express purpose of calling my people home and away from it.
Wow.
And I want to go back to the Garden of Eden stuff, but one last thought is that my wife, about now 6 or 7 months ago, told me that she wouldn't give my books, with the exception of Coming Home, to Jewish friends because they were too Christian. And they're not Christian. They were too focused on exposing and condemning Christianity, not exposing and condemning Judaism. Well, now I'm 13 books through the process of rewriting them, and well, I like to blame her for keeping me from being able to write the third volume of Coming Home, because going to new material is a lot more fun than the old material. She was right. And Observations is vastly better. And the first 3 volumes of Yada Yahweh are vastly better. And Questioning Paul is vastly better. And as we move to Questioning Paul, in it, I am not overtly writing it for the chosen people. And so in all of the other books, I'm saying, if you're welcome to read this. I wish you the best with it. Part of the mission is to expose Yahweh's teaching to Gentiles. But that's not the primary purpose. The primary audience is Yisrael and Yehudim, and God wants to call them home, and there's very little time left. Now, with Questioning Paul, you might say, wait a minute, now I'm exposing and condemning the religion of Christianity. How is that central to the core mission?
Because they've been beat to death by Christianity all these years.
That's half of the reason.
They can't defend themselves.
Nothing has been more abusive to Jews in the long history of Israel than the anti-Semitic religion using replacement theology that Paul created. So yes, that's half the reason. I want Jews to be free of its stench, of its abusive violence and hatred and anti-Semitism. That isn't actually the primary reason, and I'm trying to weave this through wherever I can. When Paul created this Odyssean Iusu priesthood, he had nothing in common with the Passover lamb. Of course, nothing in common with the prophecies of the coming Messiah. And so Jews who were bludgeoned by the religion rejected everything associated with Yahusha because of the caricature that Paul created that was so despicable.
Oh, yeah.
But in so doing, what they have done is they too have failed to acknowledge that he was the Passover lamb.
Just walked away from it, yeah.
And when they failed to acknowledge that he was the Passover lamb, there is no way for them to avail themselves of the doorway to heaven or of the gift of life. And so he didn't just rob Christians, Gentiles, of their souls. He robbed Jews of theirs too, because the natural inclination of Jews was to recoil against everything associated with the character that arose, and the Christians controlled the narrative, and so they were repulsed by it. And therefore, they didn't miss the Messiah, as Christians want to proclaim, because the Messiah is still coming. The Messiah is Dowd. They missed the Passover lamb. And by missing the Passover lamb, they do not know that Pesach, Matzah, Bakodim, and Shavuot were fulfilled. They're far more interested in dressing up as Halloween characters at Purim, which they celebrated last week. You know, they're far more interested in having a lambless Passover. They're far more excited about afflicting their souls on Yom Kippur. And so they don't know the timeline. They don't know Yahweh. They don't know what he has done. They don't know that Yosha was Yahweh saving us through the Passover lamb and through allowing his soul to be a substitute sacrifice for our own on Matzah. Or that Bakodim is a celebration of us being adopted into the covenant. And so they were deprived of that by the hideous religion that Paul composed. All right, let's return. I think this is where we left off last week. Boy, am I verbose. We're halfway through the show, and we're just now starting. One of the occupational hazards of doing what I do, and I get in this chair at about 6 o'clock in the morning, most mornings, sometimes 6:30, sometimes before 6. And I typically leave around 6, sometimes stay later. So I'm doing this a lot. And I am so excited and passionate about the things that I learn each day that if you catch me on, here's a Friday evening, well, it's impossible for me to pretend like I didn't learn anything this Friday that was interesting that you don't want to share. Sure. And so we all have in the covenant a little bit of Dowd in us. And Dowd studied, and then he shared. Now there's several differences between us and Dowd. One is that Dowd was a real prophet, so God inspired the things that he wrote, and what we're doing is translating God's inspiration through the man. There's a big difference between the two. The end result is exactly the same, but the process is different. The second is that I think the human capacity to think has been dulled. I think our attention span has been shortened. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're nearly as smart as we once were. I don't think we're as strong, and I don't think we're as smart. I think we can prolong life through science, and we have access to more information, which is really helpful.
Don't know how
but I just don't think we're smart, and I don't think we're as articulate. So as we today try to articulate the things of Yahweh, and particularly as Dowd revealed them, we just don't have the same level of intelligence or the same language skills that he had. And, it's kind of interesting, too. I read through the things that I wrote for this particular chapter that we're going to go over. And there are some lines that, should be put on billboards. I mean, there's some lines here that are extraordinarily thoughtful and insightful and life-changing. And you look at them and say, who wrote that? But, of course, it's inspired by the words that we're going to be studying. And yet, if you compare them to what Dowd wrote, they're nothing. Anyway, this is, and some of these translations are tough because we just don't really have all the tools. So, thorn bushes, for example, and thistles. My guess is that there was a lot more to these words than we know today, and our lexicons are very limited tools. but here's my best attempt at Barashit in the beginning, Genesis 3:18. Thorn bushes, quotes, detestable and loathsome, non-fruit-bearing vegetation, and abhorrent, disgusting, and irritating plants, twisted and splinter-like. That's obviously a comparison to God saying, I got this whole garden here. Beautiful, it's nourishing, beneficial. Have whatever you want. What's the counter to beautiful, nourishing, available, have whatever you want? Quotes, detestable, loathsome, non-fruit-bearing, non-edible, vegetation, abhorrent, disgusting, and irritating. All right?
Have you ever gone through a briar patch?
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
Don't like it.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, down south, I worked as a surveyor. Yep. I hate those things.
Yeah, they stick in you and have little barbs so they don't want to come out.
Oh, God.
And they all have an allergen, an irritant in them that is, that you swell up and your histamines try to fight. And there's things that grab at your clothes and it's hard to get them out. And there's a bunch of them that have toxins in them.
Mm-hmm.
Nettles, for stinging nettles, toxins, poison ivy, toxins. Yeah, so it's a big difference between living in the garden, which is where we're going back to, and living in the world that's filled with all of these irritations and all of these things that grab at us and all of these things that are annoying.
Great metaphor.
Yeah. And thistles, prickly plants, which are of no value and are used to goad, control. That's, one of the letters, the chet, is a fence, and fences in this time were comprised of these prickly, thorny weeds that they're very difficult to pass over. They create a separation, but they're used to control, to goad dumb animals. It will produce as you approach and consume the plants of the open environment. So as you go out there in those open environments, there's going to be thorn bushes, detestable and loathsome, non-fruit-bearing vegetation, horrid, disgusting, and thistles, prickly plants of no value, used to go. It will produce as you approach and consume the plants of the open environment. In the garden, Yahweh said, I want you to work the garden, and I want you to observe it, and we're going to be busy together. But I'm going to provide. Now you're going to provide. And providing is not going to be easy because you're going to have to compete for survival with all of these things that are counterproductive. Because would you choose knowledge of good and bad, thorn bushes and thistles? And by the sweat of your brow, by hard work, you're going to feed yourself, as opposed to being nourished. And it's akel lakem. Lakem is typically translated baked grains of bread, until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken. What God is saying with that is, you have devalued yourself. You had an intimate relationship with me. You were immortal. You were perfect. You were in a relationship where I was your teacher. You were my student. You were my son. I was your father. And because you chose to sever yourself from that life, now you're the sum total of what you are comprised of. You've devoured yourself so that devalued yourself so that your net worth is the material of which you are comprised.
Boy, hard to hear.
Hard to hear, but fair.
Oh, yeah.
Why is it ashes to ashes, dust to dust? Why do most people simply dissipate when they die? Why do their bodies decay? Because of this. It's the choice we made. It's not because of first sin and we're guilty of that first sin. No. It's because we continue to make the same stupid choices. And therefore, most animals have the value of the material of which they're comprised. This is because you are a collection of particles comprising matter. Afar, atah. You are dirty, little more than dust. And unto the elements which comprise the earth, you shall return. Shub. You're mortal. You're physical. Oh, by the way, being physical is degrading. Being physical is you're constantly diminishing. You're constantly eroding. Man, I can tell you, my body ain't what she used to be.
Tell me about it.
You know, 5 years from now, it's not going to be as good as it is today. We devolve.
As good as it gets. Oh,
yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah, and so what we want is what Yahweh is providing through Pesach, Matzah, Bakonim, and Shavua. We want to transition from this physical body to being immortal and spiritual. And unless we make that transition, then as a mortal, we will decay. God, this isn't a punishment here, by the way. What this is a declaration of truth. We are sum total of the elements of which we are comprised until such time as we take advantage of the source of eternal life and perfection and enrichment and adoption and empowerment. We can be more than the sum total of the elements of which we're comprised, but to do that, we have to avail ourselves of God's instructions in the covenant, which Adam and Yahowah had rejected. All right. The thorns and thistles are real. We call these abhorrent and irritating things religion and politics today. They are, in fact, the goads of control. To find, to cultivate, and to be nourished by Yahweh's instructions, we have to remove the weeds competing with them. By choking out the light and robbing them of the proper place to grow, the lush pastures Yahweh intended for his sheep would be replaced by twisted and tangled environments we call civilization. Man was conceived to be special, but now he had become common. What could be more common than the elements of the earth? His value had fallen from being the apple of God's eye to just another fleeting soul within the cycle of life. We were now worth the sum of our parts. That is the condition of humankind.
Wow. True, though. So true.
Yeah. And again, it is not a punishment. It's a statement of fact.
It's just a reality. Yeah.
Right. And what God is giving us, the entire purpose of this story, and every story he tells is, there's a better choice. I'm offering you, should you wish to take advantage of it, the opportunity to flourish and to grow, to be reliant on me, to be nurtured by me, to live with me, to be adopted into my family, to be perfected, to be immortal, to be enriched, to be empowered. I have the antidote for all of this, if you'll only accept it. In the garden, Yahweh provided nourishment, but Adam and Yahowah chose to trade that gift for a chance to rise in stature. That is, by the way, it's the same crime that Hasatan, Satan, committed.
Mm-hmm. Raise him above
Satan
God.
wanted to be seen as greater than God, to be worshipped as if he were a god. And what did Yahowah want? Why did Yahowah ultimately take the fruit?
To be like God.
She wanted to be like God.
To be a God. Yeah.
Yes. So, seeking to rise up and be like a god is devalued. Consequence. It had the opposite effect, diminishing man. And that's the nature of every religion. They call, religion inspires man. No, it degrades man. Politics, inspire and man's highest. No, Paul, no. So I was telling my dear friend today is that men and women individually, we have the capacity for good and evil. And our unique character and personality determines how much good versus bad we display. And the circumstances we're in play a tremendous role. But individually, we have the capacity for both. Collectively, in religious institutions and political parties, as part of civilization, man is almost universally bad. And so the key thing is here that we recognize that the things that man has come up with to inspire men almost always make man worse. You look at political correctness and progressive politics, where things are collectivized and that there is no morality. There is, in political correctness, that which is not true. But if it's societally beneficial to those in charge, it is mandated. It's caused people to be unable to think. They don't know right from wrong anymore. They have no judgmental filter. So in a time when information is ubiquitous, they can't process any of it. And so collectivized man has become exceedingly rotten. What may have sounded like an overreaction at first glance, from the proper perspective, is absolutely appropriate. When we trust and allow Yahweh to care for us, we become ever more like God. That's why my friend asked me tonight, how are you? Is there anything you need? I'm great. No. If you were to ask what I needed or what I wanted that I don't have, I couldn't come up with a list.
Punch.
Yeah, fruit punch. You haven't sent us. My wife loves a particular fruit punch that's not available here on the island, and I have my favorite bootlegger has to send me the fruit punch for me to
don't
keep
don't talk so loud.
Yes, my wife properly satiated. Yes. That is my wife's need.
Yeah, that's right.
When we try to elevate ourselves and compete with God, we become as worthless as our ambitions. So man must work to produce his own sustenance. And even then, life begins to, or we begin in this whole life process to ostracize ourselves from God's company. It is sort of like salvation. We can rely on God and accept his generosity and camp out with him, or we can rely on ourselves and see where that takes us. The moral of the story is that without God, we are insignificant. We are, as microevolutionary theory would describe us. We're an ordinary animal, or a temporal arrangement of matter whose journey is from dust to dust. It is one simple story, and we are afforded the proper perspective on life through this simple account. Of course, the whole thing is a paradox. God cannot have a loving relationship with us if he leaves us no choice but to accept in return his affection. If we have no choice, our response can be nothing more than an involuntary act of servitude. But empowered with choice, we can opt for separation, choosing either love or indifference. And I want to tell you, having been there in my life, and I would assume that all of you have, if you haven't, it is an experience that I would strongly encourage. unrequited love, whether it's even love or infatuation. But when boy meets girl or girl meets boy and one thinks, oh, pretty, nice, I like, and the other says, not so much for me. That is the most debilitating, frustrating, and empty experience in the world. God loved Adam. Loved Yahowah. They chose not him. Stunningly painful. As God's describing the consequence of that, it brings him no joy. This is far sadder for Yahowah than it is for Adam and Yahowah. In the Garden of Eden, God began by providing a simple way to choose between the options of love or indifference. Do anything you want. Just know that if you eat fruit from this one tree, life as you know it will end. There were no edicts, no orders, no commandments, just some direction and guidance. We were given and we retain the liberty to accept it or reject it, even change it and corrupt it, but not without consequence. The first couple and Yahowah communicated joyfully and productively in the garden for decades. I think 7 or 8, although time was essentially immaterial. And then, based upon errant information, they did as we are prone to do and made a poor decision. While it did not surprise Yahowah, it did sadden him. This probably, of all of creation, is among the saddest days for Yah. I think there were others. Personally, I'm convinced that the inability of Yehudim in general, and Yosef's disciples in particular, to confront Paul early on. That's why he said, stand up to him, even if it's for a moment. Stand up to him. And they didn't. And he was able to perpetrate and sow the seeds of the plague of death. I think that was exceedingly sad for God. But this is a sad day. He knew it was going to happen. And so he had devised a remedy. There would be an antidote for the poison of misleading words which man and woman had ingested. To save our souls, Yahowah would sacrifice his soul. He would use it to serve as the Passover lamb, and then again to unleaven our souls of the fungus during unyeasted bread. By availing ourselves of his sacrifice, of his ransoming gift, we would be readmitted into fellowship. That is the Torah's message. It is the central plot of the greatest story ever told. Where is this story told, by the way?
Way Mikra in the Torah.
This story is told in the first book of the Torah, Bereshit, Genesis,
sure.
right? You go from this story to the story of Babel, of man corrupting the message, to the story of Noah and the ark,
yes,
to the story of Abraham and the formation of the covenant, to the story of Yahowah redeeming his people out of the crucibles of human oppression in Egypt, to the story of the Torah being shared with all humankind. They flow one step to the next. This story is told at the beginning of the Torah. It shouldn't be hard to come to know and appreciate the remedy that Yahweh was offering. Like a good parent, Yahweh confronted the cast of characters who acted badly in the garden, admonishing them individually. You know, Adam didn't receive the consequence of having to work hard because of Towrah. Towrah didn't receive the consequence of having such difficulty in the most difficult job in the world, raising children, because of Satan. They tried to blame one another, but that wasn't God's approach. It says, based on what you have done, this is the appropriate consequence. So there would be an antidote for the poison, for the misleading words that we had ingested. To save our souls, Yahweh, as I said, he would sacrifice his own. Like a good parent, each of these individuals was given a specific consequence, individually, letting them know that their actions had this consequence. He also established the standard he would use throughout his revelation. His words were historic, they were contextual, they were literal, they were symbolic, and they were prophetic. Historic, contextual, literal, symbolic, and prophetic, all at the same time. This becomes even more evident when we seek to be expansive and use amplification as we have in understanding these passages, magnifying each word to see. I'd like to say all that was intended, but I can tell you that I'm not capable of that, try as I might. The Hebrew words which undergird these English translations are far richer in shading and meaning than the more humble ones which we have selected to replace them. And quite honestly, the challenge with amplified translations is our capacity to think and our ability to stay focused. We just don't have that capacity unless we exercise it consistently. One of my favorite editors, J.K., is on me all the time, saying, this ought to be 4 sentences, not one sentence. This is a run-on sentence. You need to rewrite this. And he's right. Because I do this 10, 12 hours a day. I do it 6 days a week. And so in doing it, I have the tendency to see all these connections, and I want to write a sentence as long as a paragraph. And do. And then I have to go back through and say, people are never going to follow all that. I have to break that into 4 sentences. And the reason is that we have lost the capacity to stay focused long enough to bring all the components that are being shared together so that we understand the interrelationship and therefore go from knowing to understanding. And while I get to exercise that part of my brain every day for 12 hours a day, very few other people have that luxury. And so that's one of the big challenges in communicating is giving people enough information, but not too much information. The more that you amplify, the more you learn, but the harder it is for people to process. We had a really special boy over at our home 2 weeks ago that is, he's 9 years old. He's learning Chinese. He's learning to play the piano. He's learning to program using very complex computer languages. He's self-taught in school, and he's so advanced that we were starting to talk about. Well, he says, I don't believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, and I don't believe in this, that God died and that there was a Jesus and all this sort of thing. And the kid's 9. So, I decided to talk to him about okay, well, you're right. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. It is 14 billion years old, and he said, but it wasn't created in 6 days. I said, oh, yes, it was. And so, we talked about how that was possible and how this 6 24-hour days and 14 billion years are exactly the same length of time. And you could see the lights going on and turning in his head and discussions on relativity and the nature of time. And, he seemed to process it. And then I said, I just want to see, to the extent that you're able to read some of what I've written. And I handed him the first volume of Yada Yahweh, as it's been rewritten in the actual book, and said, can you read this aloud? And then each time you read a sentence, I want you to tell me if you understand the words. And, he read 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 sentences as he'd go along, and the vocabulary was a bit beyond him, and the concepts were a bit beyond him, and he just had to say to me, I can read it, but I really don't understand it. God's not, what God says, listen, the Torah is easy to understand for those who are open-minded. I think it is true if you really work at it. I think it is for us now. But this is hard for a lot of people. God's really smart, and it's, we're not at liberty to dumb him down. So the more we amplify, the more we learn, but the harder it is for people to process.
How about a younger kid? What about a younger child who is of that intellect but speaks Hebrew as a native tongue?
I think it's harder, not easier.
Really?
Yeah, modern Hebrew is very different.
Yes.
Because the modern Hebrew with all the vowel pointing and everything.
Yeah, well, actually, they don't vowel point. They've come up with an alphabet now that essentially includes the vowels. And so if you look at most modern Hebrew in a newspaper or something like that, it's not in the Masoretic form with the vowel pointing. So no, you can. They can. Yeah, they in fact can read it. They can speak it. But I've said this for a long time, and I'm still convinced it's true, which is that if I were a natural speaker of Hebrew, then I don't think there's any chance that I could have written these books, because the translations are not going to be valid or in depth, nor are they going to share the insights that we're learning if you simply replace a Hebrew word with an English word based upon the evolution of the language. You're so much better off looking up each word. Even if you've translated a word 1,000 times, look it up. Consider the roots. Consider the words that are spelled similarly. Consider the first use. Consider the actionable nature.
Grammar.
Consider the grammar, the stems, which are so rich, the moods, the conjugations. And so if I were a natural speaker of Hebrew, and I could just do this on the fly as opposed to really working at it and having to turn over every stone, I don't think we'd have the same result. And I think that has been a liability for a lot of natural Hebrew speakers. And, keep in mind that prior to about 1950, there were exceedingly few people who spoke Hebrew.
Yes.
There was no actually active language of Hebrew spoken anywhere in the world.
No.
There were Jews
mostly
who spoke
Yiddish,
but Yiddish is a blend of
German
mostly German and Hebrew together, but it's a far cry from Hebrew. Sure. And the only reason that there is a modern variation of Hebrew is because in 1948, when Israel became a country again, and the Muslims declared war on them, the people all spoke different languages. They spoke German and Russian and French, and some that had still been in the land were speaking Arabic. They didn't have a common language. And so it was exceedingly difficult to communicate to a people trying to survive odds of 100 to 1. They're outgunned, they're outmanned. And so it became essential that they develop a common language that would bring them together. And so they came up with ways of making the Babylonian Hebrew, if you will, into a modern language. And so there really isn't a natural speaker of this alphabet and this language that appears in the Torah.
You know, I did something. I don't mean to interrupt too much, but I was doing halal last night, and I did a research, and I've got 11 words that come from the verbal root of halal to understand what halal can mean.
Yes.
And then if you went to the letters and everything, my God, it took me 2 hours.
Right.
And I'm going, wow. So it's
and you think there's anyone that's going to do that if you're just a natural speaker?
Casually? No.
No, you're going to transliterate the word because it's used as a name. No. Transliterate it and move on, right?
And you just say shine and move on. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's the advantage.
I guess it's a want-to thing. Yeah.
You've got to have a want-to. Mm-hmm. So, had Adam and Chawah done what we're doing now, closely examining and carefully considering Yahweh's guidance, they would have remained in Eden. Sadly for them, albeit fortunately for us, they did not, but we still can. Consider doing so on engraved invitation. In the summary statements we have just read, there are 3 players and 3 predictions. Each requires us to pay attention to the context, to the circumstances, and the participants, because Yahweh said something different to the serpent, to Adam, and to Chawah, the woman we erroneously called Eve. Each admonition and prediction should be evaluated within the context of the relationship and how it was severed. The serpent became cursed and evil, an abomination, something to be abhorred, which may be why the adversary, Satan, must disguise his appearance when he beguiles men into doing his bidding. He becomes the lowest form of life, a being that must grovel in man's rubbish in order to seduce him. Leah shared something with me today. Mormonism. There's a letter that was written by, I guess it's one of Joseph Smith's daughters, that was has now come to light in the last few years, that goes into explicit detail as to how these golden tablets came to be exposed to Joseph Smith, and they when he came upon them, there was a salamander that spoke to him, and the Hebrew term nakash that we translate serpent, it can mean any lowly reptilian creature that creeps on belly. Salamander would be perfect. So we called it a salamander. And the salamander, so a form of nakash, told him, "I'm not going to reveal this to you unless your brother is here." Well, problem was the brother had died. So we had the weekend in Bernie's. Joseph Smith digs up his dead brother, props him up on a rock, and said, "He's here, okay, lay it on." And so it is a salamander who shared this with him. And, of course, who is that salamander? Satan.
The same serpent from the garden.
Yeah, Satan. And so the hierarchy of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is killing, trying to control the spread of this letter. But it is just another example of Satan as a serpent seducing. The adversary's rebellion was his undoing, and yet Satan has and will continue to win his battles. His crowning achievements remain the Babylonian religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They represent the devil's most debilitating, effective, and abusive ploys. The devil's advocate, Paul. Each has bruised Israel's heel, symbolic of Jacob. That is the one thing they have in common. Even Judaism is the abuse and degradation of Jews. Satan plays a special role in the drama that is about to unfold. In the West, he is called Lucifer, from Latin meaning light giver. But that is neither his name nor a proper description. It is, as you study, halal in the first time that it is written, but it is also written as Hillel, with the addition of a yod. It's Hillel ben Shakar, which implies that he is an arrogant rising star. As such, Hillel's name was prophetic, as he gave rise to the sun god worship and religions globally in opposition to Yahweh. The Hebrew meaning of the word upon which Satan's name is based is particularly illuminating. Whether it's rendered Hillel or Halal, the adversary's designation means corruptible, degraded, once proud but now humbled, wounded, polluted, corrupted. The name also means to shine, in the sense of showing off or boasting, to be clamorous and foolish, to celebrate oneself, to stultify, to make, to feign self, and be mad against someone. So, Kirk, you did some, you said some research just a moment ago on this beauty. What did you find beyond what I have shared?
Well, I found like all these, there's about 11, if you do a word search, you'll find there's about 11 words that are associated with halal, and they all, if they tell you this is from the verbal root. You have halelah, which is madness and insanity. You have madness as a shining as a negative, in a negative sense. You have halal in three different forms. To shine is a verb, to be boastful and praise. To shine or flash forth like lightning, which is that was interesting.
I'm on the road to Damascus. He had a very chit-chatty God. Where it's interesting that Yahweh makes it very clear that when the Israelites say, we don't want to hear that boobied voice anymore, he says, hey, I get you. I understand. I'm not going to do it anymore. And yet, Paul claims that the God spoke to him with the booming voice out of the heaven. Wait a minute, that can't be Yahweh. He's not going to do it anymore. And then the John the Baptist experience, got the booming voice of God. This is my son, whom I'm pleased. Wait a minute. God said he wasn't going to do that anymore. So it's not God, is it? Old Joseph Smith, I'm going to have the talking tadpole. Nope. Nope, the chit-chatty one is Satan. Yahweh speaks through his Torah and prophets. You want to hear him? Read them. If you want God to speak to you with the booming voice, you're going to hear God all right. A wannabe God, you're going to hear Satan. I was sure I heard his voice. He told me this is on you. No, he didn't. The only way you can hear his voice is to recite his Torah and prophets. He speaks very clearly. But if you're looking for the voice out of the sky, out of the heavens, you're going to hear Satan, because God said, I'm not going to do that. So what else did you find?
Well, I've got mahalal, which is to praise of him by others. It's testing the praise by others to determine its worth.
By the way, mahalal is a compound of ma and halal. Ma means to question, to ponder the implications of.
Well, that was my final analysis. I got to about 5 of them. According to Measure of his boasting, and according to the things which he boasts of, and accordingly to his fame, real or imagine. And then I made a note that, if you're going to use M, then you're questioning. It means to question the light. So I said, okay, that's a clue.
Question the light. Now, by the way, if you're questioning Yahweh's light, that's a really good thing. Yahweh wants us to
examine the words. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the best part? When you're translating JB, the best part is when you're questioning everything that comprises a word, and you're questioning, what does God mean by this statement? How do I apply it? How do I grow from it? What can I share? What can I learn? Those are questions. So
questions are good. Questions are how we learn.
Absolutely.
When you don't question anything, you don't learn anything.
Correct. And so people, if they think that questioning is a pejorative, I'm not going to question God's word, it's accepted. Well, the reason you're in such a mess is you're not questioning it. If you start to question it, you'd probably figure some stuff out.
Yeah, it used to drive me crazy. Christian relatives like, you got to have a childlike faith. And they would always bring that up. And I'm like, have you ever been around a kid? My child's just about to be 5 years old. The most common question out of her mouth is why? And then he'll explain why. And then you're like, why that? And they want to know everything. They question everything.
That's right.
They don't take anything I tell her at face value.
Right. They don't, and because they want to learn. They genuinely want to know. They're inquisitive. We somehow drum out the inquisitive nature because we find that, if you're questioning religion or politics or patriotism, society doesn't take well to that. And if you're questioning marches and protests like Black Lives Matter, you're questioning the fastest growing religion, which is conspiracy. People come down really hard on you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you won't work
Christianity, it's a double-edged sword because it's all based on faith. Well, as soon as you question, you don't have faith. If your entire salvation is based on that, questioning literally means being damned to hell in their religion.
That's correct. Well, that's why the Quran in the last surah revealed, the 5th, it concludes by saying that those who question their faith lost it. And so the warning is never question your faith. And so in Islam, you can't question. Well, of course, because if you question any part of Islam, you wouldn't be a Muslim. Dumbest religion ever conceived. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of competition for that. Mormonism, Scientology, Islam. Actually, when you understand it, Christianity is just so unbelievably stupid. If you liked Homer, then I guess you'll love Christianity. But that's our big problem is we have to question. An open mind is a questioning mind. So when God says, the Torah is easy to understand, if you have an open mind, what he's saying is it's easy to understand if you ask a lot of questions. If Torah means teaching, well, teaching is designed to answer questions. We teach our children when your daughter says why, what comes out of your mouth next ought to be teaching. Instructions. Guidance. This is why. Yeah, I had, of course, with the worst of those when my eldest was 2. He hit his brother who was 1, and his mother was just insistent on spanking him. Yeah, and so 5 hours later, I gave him. I'm not into it. I didn't think this was appropriate. So he's got a big thick diaper on, and I have an open hand, and you can make some noise with a diaper that is not felt by the child, but accomplishes the goal with the child's mother.
Attention getter.
And, it's a attention getter, and so you just So I did what I was ordered to do, and to keep some sense of credibility within the family structure, and so my son. And I told him, okay, you hit your brother. You can't hit your brother. And he said, then why did you hit me?
Fell off downhill since then.
That was almost 35 years ago, and I can tell you I still don't have an answer. But I guarantee you one thing, never spank him again.
Made me do it. Your mother.
Yeah, well, that was the natural answer. That makes me come across as a wimp, and that's just not.
No, I don't do that.
Probably isn't. That's probably not going to work. And if I had said that, then of course my ex would have had a conniption fit.
Field day.
Field day, and then it would have been really. However, quite honestly, if I had stayed to my values and say no, I'm not going to do it, it's an appropriate response. I can't hit him and tell him that hitting is bad. You see the duplicity in all this, plus the fact it happened 6-8 hours ago. It's way too late to do anything than just have an explanation. And had that blown up into a windstorm, that would have been a good idea. It might have been able to extricate the imprinting that my ex was able to do on my sons, and it may have made a tremendous difference in their life. So I was a wimp, and I did cower it out, and that was a mistake. So once again, we ought to stand on principle. We ought to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do,
for the right reason,
and not capitulate. But at the time, I did not know yet. And again, the key element here, just like the fruit in the garden, God didn't say if you eat it one time, you're done. He said if you make a habit of eating it, life as you know it's over. And so we're right back to the same thing. Is that okay? I made a mistake. I subsequently corrected that mistake, and so I'm no longer responsible for that mistake. I've actually learned from it and moved on from it, and that's a good thing. It's like I'm rewriting all of these books because I made some mistakes. God's not upset that I made the mistakes. He's not holding me accountable for the mistakes. Why? Because I'm willing.
Happy you learned from them.
Yeah, to admit that I made them and learn from them and try to correct them.
Yeah. Let me ask both of y'all one question before we get away from Hallel. You've also got Hallel, and Hallel is Hey Yod Lam Lam.
Yes.
Doesn't that mean man lifts and leads? As
yes,
opposed
it does.
To
the first letter being
the way that's what I did.
Yeah, the first letter is man taking a stand, and he is.
He's doing.
It's his
he's doing the lifting. He's doing the leading.
With the hand. It is, and oh, by the way, that hand is not reaching out to him now. It's reaching away from him.
Yes.
The letters read right to left, and so
that leads you to Yah.
Yeah, it's not leading you to Yah's open hand. He's not reaching Yah's open hand. He is on the opposite side of that hand.
Correct.
And then he is. It's this person that's exerting their own influence then, because the hand is now coming from the direction of that individual and going out from them to the two lameds, and therefore it's man using his influence as the shepherd,
as opposed to Yahweh. Yeah. And that's probably why they changed it to Helel in the English, perhaps, because that's the way they spell it in most of the Strongs. They changed it. I thought that's odd that they would change it. Where did they drop the Y?
Yeah, and if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, it is spelled differently both times. Hallel and Halal.
I don't think it can't be a mistake. They must do that to hide it some more.
Yeah, so both. It is possible, by the way. I mean, the scribe who scribed the great Isaiah scroll made some mistakes. God did not intervene in holding the scribe's hands. I will tell you that Hebrew scribes, unlike the Greek and Latin scribes, they were the antithesis of those. They were really diligent. I don't think there's a single scribe we've come across for any of the ancient scrolls who deliberately to misconstrue what Yahweh said. I think they were all diligent. The differences between the scrolls are nothing but misspellings, and occasionally if you're copying something, you go from one line and you skip something because you end up back and you see the similar word on the next line, and there's occasionally there's omissions that are just naturally explained in the way that our eyes work when we're copying something, and there's some things that are slightly different tenses. The differences between the scrolls is really small, and even the difference between the Masoretic text, if you remove the vowel pointing and you just have the Hebrew letters there, the actual text is about it's one word in 14 or 15, and most of those words are minuscule, and preposition here or there or a pronoun. It's really small. They were really diligent. It's the translations and the interpretations that get all screwed up.
Very few people got to see it.
Yeah, exceedingly well maintained.
You could say, yeah. You can always say what you want to say about it if nobody can go over there and look at it.
Yeah, I'm still surprised as to how bad our English translations are when so many of these words have actionable roots, and so many of these words are explained in context. There is a verbal root, ya'al, for Hillel, and so I think the reason that you see the Y in it, as opposed to halal is simply man as shepherd and guide, and Hillel is man using his influence to shepherd and guide. But the Y is actually there because it is in the verbal root. So that would explain why we're given that particular clue, and we can study it. It is a surprise that you would see Hillel ben Shachar just change to Lucifer. It means light bearer in Latin. Latin took precedent for years. If you were to say the name Hillel ben Shachar, no one knows it. If you were to say Lucifer, everybody knows that is the devil's name, but yet that's not the devil's name. It's Hillel ben Shachar. If I tell people Adam and Towrah, they say, "What are you smoking?" And even as we get to Towrah, which we'll get to in our next program, Towrah's name, everyone says means life giver. Well, it's actually not based upon Che, which is life.
Yes.
But Towrah, which means to report, to explain, to tell. Make a declaration.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what it says.
Yeah.
What you'll find if you look.
Yeah. In fact,
if I can find it, anybody can find it.
Come on. I've taken this approach, Kirk, is that one of the advantages of using people like us is that we are nobody special. We've had no special training, no special education. We certainly don't have the gift of oratory. We don't have a technical education or background. There is no title that we have that would impress anybody. We're just like everybody else. With the exception that we are passionate about knowing Yahweh, enjoying our relationship with Him, learning from Him, and sharing what we learn. Those things are different, but not our intellect, not our qualifications. And so if we can do this, everybody's without excuse. Everyone can do it. Now that's probably not quite true. It isn't true at all. If you're living in an Islamic world, you're not going to have access to any of the tools.
You don't have a chance. No.
You don't have a chance. That's why God so hates religion. If you're living in Europe, you're living in the United States, you're living in Asia, you have access to all these tools. You can absolutely do it. But of course, you have to be free of religion to be able to do it effectively. So what's interesting here is that as we'll go over this and maybe repeat it on our next program, wouldn't you expect Adam and Chawah to have a rebuttal, say, wait a minute, that's you can't do that too much. Let's negotiate. But no. Adam just comes up with a declaration. The first thing he does is he names his woman. Mm-hmm. And he says, so the man, Adam, called Kara. Well, that's an important verb.
Yes, call out.
Kara. Kara is the verb that leads us to the mikre. Mikre is based on Kara, and it means to call out, to invite, to welcome, to summon, to pronounce, to proclaim. It's about as important a verb as there is. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more important verb than Kara. And so the man called his woman's, Isha, Hugh, and his female companion. Isha is sometimes translated wife, but it doesn't mean wife. Ish is the Hebrew word for male individual. Isha, with the A at the end of it, is a female individual, of course, which is so tantalizing because you get from masculine to feminine with the as the conclusion, and there are hundreds of examples of this in Hebrew. So
Torah.
That means that Torah is feminine.
Yahweh. Yeah, Yahweh.
And, oh, by the way, Yahweh's name is feminine.
Feminine.
Yeah, I love it. Sarah's name, feminine. Isha is the feminine of Ish. The man called his woman's name Shem. Chawah. Chawah means to declare, to make known, to explain, and to interpret. It's from the verb Chawah, spelled exactly the same way, to inform, and then only from the context you can derive che, which means life, one who gives life, renews life. But that's derived from context, not the word's meaning.
No.
Because she was the mother, the M, of all life, che. Now, the problem with this is it's not true. Lots of things in the Torah, by the way, aren't right, aren't true.
Or don't fit that person, as we assume. Yeah. Yeah,
lots of things. If people say it could, how many stupid things does Abraham say and do? Gazillions, right? I don't have any problem with him choosing to name the woman Chawah. That was his choice.
Yeah.
To declare and make known. Because what? She passed on the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, so she certainly made known and provided the ability to interpret. That's a pretty good name. But then for him to say she is the mother of all life, that's just not true.
There's a lot of life out there already.
Yeah, a lot of life out there already. She is simply the mother of other humans that would share on the Sama. So she was the mother of some very special life. And oh, by the way, she was not a very good mother. That was not something she did very well. We're going to learn just how bad a mother she turned out to be. So this is not true, not literally, of Chawah anyway. She is not the mother of all life, not even remotely. Quite the opposite. As a consequence of improperly Chawah, explaining, interpreting, and declaring Yahweh's instructions, she and he would die. She was only the mother of future generations of Nesama, Adam. Moreover, Chawah's actionable basis, as you found out, Kurt, is not Che. It's not C-H-A-Y. There's no Y in it. It's C-H-W-H. Well,
H, yes.
there is no Hey in Che. There is no Yod in Che. So all they do is share the first letter. But if you look at the three-letter root of the verb Chawah, it's identical to the name Chawah. And the verb means to declare and to make known, to explain, to interpret, to announce with words, verbally or in writing.
If you want to check that too, I was going to say, if you want to check that too, after you've come to that conclusion, you go to Job the first time it's used in 15:17, and it says, "I will tell you, I will show you," or in Psalms where it says the next one where it says to reveal knowledge. So now you got to incorporate that into your scenario.
Right, you have to.
Okay. Yeah, can't do it otherwise.
And what is so tragic is that the vast ponderance of the time that Chawah shows up later in the Torah and prophets, the nincompoops that created the English translations, all say it means to bow down and worship. How in the hell
it's nowhere
bow down and worship to make an announcement, to communicate with words, to explain, to interpret? How in the world did they get there? Particularly it's the name of the first woman. Do you think that Adam, after all of this, is saying, "I'm going to name her bow down and worship"?
Hardly.
Does his explanation say, "I'm going to name her this because she's the source of all life, and the name means bow down and worship"? But, by the way, there is a correlation, two correlations with the name. First, I've already shared. Because she was the first to eat from that tree and then gave it to Adam, she did inform and make information available that would enable both of them to interpret information and make declarations from that point on. That's a direct correlation. But second of all, what is the mother of life? The mother of life is making an announcement, a declaration that you have properly interpreted the instructions that Yahweh has provided for participation in his covenant. You make a declaration, an announcement that you're attending the Moed Mikra. And so it is true that Chawah, making a declaration, making known, informing, explaining, announcing, our acceptance of these things is in fact the mother of all life, isn't it? So the definition.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I know. I was going to say it fits when you think about it from what the word means. It is actually that informing, announcing, interpreting, declaring that we have understood Yahweh's instructions and we accept Yahweh's terms and conditions, we are answering his invitations, is the mother of all life.
But that's reinforced. You asked the question about strong number 2333, which means to village or tent or a home of a family, or to call out and gather together. There's the Moed Mikra. So it's all over the place. It covers everything you're talking about. So the translation you made is perfect. The others are stupid.
They are. They are, and actually we can render Adam's statement as true if rather than transliterating Chawah's name, we translate Chawah's name. If we translate Chawah's name, he named his woman to interpret, to announce, to declare, because that is the mother of all life. It's a true statement.
Yeah. And now it makes sense.
Now he is telling us what we need to know to bring us back home. Now, that, by the way, is the beauty of doing this program. Sure, I knew how to properly translate Yahowah. You saw it there. I put in all the explanation, all the research, and yet I don't think that I made that connection and need to do it. That's the beauty of the more we think about, the more we talk about
Jackie going, oh, no.
Oh, no, Jackie said I have to rewrite it. Oh, no, I have to republish it.
Stop
Please
it, y'all. Stop it.
Say it's not true. Well, you know what? We have always, in these programs, gone well beyond what the words say. You know, the only difference now and what I have previously done is that the words that I'm writing, for the most part, regarding these translations now are much more insightful, inspired by the translations, and sometimes even profound. And so I feel compelled to actually share what I originally wrote and then go beyond that. Where before I only read on these programs the translations and never read my commentary and do all of the commentary extemporaneously without ever reading any of what my interpretations. So I think you've noticed this, as we have gone back to the rewrites. I've taken a different approach because some of what is now written is really profound. It's kind of an out-of-body experience as we realize that Yahweh is getting ready to use this, and it ought to be that way. Yeah. And it is that way. But still in this program, we go beyond the written text. So we don't always have to go back and change the written text. There's nothing here that's wrong. Every bit of the writing is correct. Yeah. It's just that we have found something beyond it.
Yeah. Well, I'd hope people who read this at some point will go to JB's site and that sort of thing, and then they can hear all of us chatting about all this stuff and be part of it all and just kind of get a deeper understanding as well as they read it. I think it's great because that's what I do. I mean, that's what I did for years, just listening to you and JB long before I ever got to join y'all. I would sit there and go, wow, this is so cool.
It is one of the things, too, that's really important. And I see this every day. When you have a politician or someone and they're reading just a script, they don't look up and they don't add anything to it, and they don't avail themselves to questions. They don't know the material. They don't own the material. They don't know the material. They don't understand the material. They're incapable of exposing themselves to scrutiny, and they're uncomfortable speaking from the gut, which is kind of the repository of how our attitude towards the things that we're reading and sharing. And so I think it conveys so much more credibility, veracity to this transition from knowing to understanding when we're willing to do most of every program extemporaneously. It's a huge difference between preparing and having every word scripted and just sharing from the heart in the Hebrew sense, which is the seat of judgment. Sure. So that's what I would encourage people to recognize that we are doing so much of this from our own knowledge and understanding. Yeah.
Well, also when we get to talk, and I in JB and you and I would come up with stuff, and it's like, oh wow, I hadn't thought of that. And you won't get it any other way.
Yes. And one of the things that I really like is when we're doing this program, and you'll just ask a question. We haven't rehearsed that question. We haven't scripted that question.
No, we don't.
There is nothing that's prepared. We're asking a question, and if you know the material, if that material, it's like when Yahweh says He's going to inscribe the Torah in us. Well, we have the opportunity to integrate the Torah into our lives even now. And when His teaching is integrated in our lives and our perspective becomes similar to His and our attitude and approach is consistent and similar, then you ought to be able to field questions.
Get a lot of understanding. Sure. You should understand quite a lot.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And every time you go through the material, you should learn something new. You should be able to add.
Don't you?
Because if you couldn't add something new every time you're experiencing something Yahweh says, then how are you going to survive through eternity? It wouldn't be possible.
No.
You'd go stark raving mad if you were not in a position where every time you're exposed to Yahweh, you learn something new.
Yeah.
So no, Jack, you don't have to resubmit the volume based upon what we're learning. She is. Gosh,
he still speaks very highly of you.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes you go through life and you wonder just how Yahweh managed, without intervening in human affairs, to bring this all together. Without Jackie doing what she's doing now, and without the team that's working with her to provide the edits, we wouldn't be doing this. So here's a person quietly behind the scenes with such a steady hand, so thoughtful and unselfish with her time. It's just marvelous.
Between JB's site and Jackie's showing me stuff, I couldn't. I don't even want to play without them.
Yeah.
I know I talk too much, and I'm sorry about that, JB.
Or for something, for example, I was trying some weeks ago to try to come to grips with how Paul came up with this notion of baptism. Because it's clearly Paul. Again, we make the mistake of thinking that Mark came before Paul, but that's not the case. Mark is 10, 15 years after Paul. Matthew was 50 years after Paul. And so we make the mistake of not recognizing it begins with Paul. How did Paul come up with the idea of John the Baptist and of baptism? Because he's not that creative, and his inspiration wasn't creative either. Well, it came from the sibling oracles. And when I was sitting there, trying to figure it out, Leah just came in and said, "Oh, I know the answer. I'll send you some links here. Just give me 5 minutes or so. I'll send you the material." Now, she's sending me this mountain of material that I had to.
As only Leah can.
Oh, goodness gracious! So I was in the middle of trying to finish the volume, so I quickly scanned and found what I needed just to, it says, okay, baptism came out, and the whole concept of John the Baptist came out of the sibling oracles. And then I just said, I'll go back to this later. Well, later happened to be as I was writing chapter 2 for volume 4, and I read them. And oh my goodness. Wow. It's between that and Homer, it's the whole story of Christianity right there. And so you need a Leah in your life if you're going to do this. And so Leah showed up in your life. You need a Jackie. And you need also somebody that just is going to look at it like an artist from I mean, you do. You look at it from a different perspective. than I do, and it's and that creates this really nice blend where where we relate to more people.
Well, I wish I had the skills of JB's computer skills.
Yeah,
I'm so far behind. I'm so far behind the eight ball.
That is clearly not your skill set. But but
anything you want to share, send it over. I'll be more than happy to put it up for you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll figure it out.
All true. We all have
I've got
our
a couple things up there that are just your handwritten notes.
Yes, you do.
Well, there's a thing that Jackie sent me that's it's called a Incredible 2 or something, where you can actually write it in, and it'll type it for you from what you write, and then you can leave the letters. So I'm probably gonna next time if I ever get some money, I'm gonna buy myself one of those, because then I can send stuff to all of y'all, and you can say,
"Oh yeah,"
wow.
So you actually
be
write
really
it on
impressed.
it. Yeah, you write it on a tablet.
You write it on the tablet, and it turns it into printed material. And if you want to leave a blank like you do, when you're typing and you leave it for the letters, I could go back in on top of that and write it in there and send it to you, and that would save me hours.
Yes.
And just that's what I'm looking forward to. That's the anyway. So
all right, my friends.
I'm slowly moving into the 21st century. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
Sorry.
Not too quickly. We'll be back with you this time next week. May bless. Have a wonderful rest of your Shabbat, and we look forward to sharing even more on the chronicles of Yahowah and Adam and their relationship with Yah as we press forward. I think you will be surprised by what we can learn from what Yah shared. Good night, y'all.
Shabbat shalom, y'all.
Shabbat shalom.